Welcome back everyone to the 107th EOcafe. Firstly, I'd like to apologize on behalf of Jeff. He had a last minute change of plans due to personal reasons, so he can't make it today. So I'll be moderating the EOcafe today. Today we're going to focus on how Earth observation solutions can be leveraged for sustainable and resilient port ecosystems. But before we dive into the topic, I'd just like to kindly remind you of the rules. So feel free to leave your camera on. We like to see you, but please keep your microphone off unless we call on you to come in and ask a question. We ask you to put the questions in the chat, but we'll come back to those later and we'll ask you to come in and ask the question yourself. So without further ado, let's get started. So as I said, today we're going to talk about ports. I think it's become quite clear in the last few weeks how crucial maritime transport is to the global economy. It accounts for around 80% of global trade, and ports are at the center of it all. But ports are not just about the ships or the infrastructure on site. They're part of a much larger logistical chain, upstream and downstream. They face a number of challenges linked to climate and logistical aspects, and they can also themselves produce significant environmental and social impacts. Earth observation technologies in this context can support ports and their stakeholders in addressing many of these challenges. And it's within this context that the ESA best practices EO for ports looked into identifying pressing end user needs across the ports industry business processes and understanding how the current capabilities of EO can address these challenges. So bringing together port and EO expert, EO for Ports co-designed EO-based solutions that respond to the prioritized requirements identified. These were then tested in realistic condition using ESA's Application Propagation Environment, APEX, Geospatial Explorer. We'll hear more about all of these in a minute, but first I'd like to invite our speakers to introduce themselves, maybe starting with Heine.
Yes, hello. Very glad to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Rainer Müller. I'm from the Institute of Shipping, Economics and Logistics, or ISL in short. Thank you.
Thank you, Heine. Welcome. Christos, maybe next.
Yes, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. I have followed so many EOcafes that it's nice to be on the other side of the tableau for once. The CTO of Geosystems Hellas, based in Athens, Greece, and I was also reviewing a specific activity, the EO-based practices for ports. So I will be really glad to also be part of the discussion.
Welcome, Christos. And then last but not least, maybe Patrick.
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Patrick Griffiths. I work in ESA in the Earth Observation Directorate in the Science Department. I'm based in Harwell in Exeter, and I'm part of a team called Digital Innovation. We work mainly on the digital enablement of Earth observation-based solutions, and we supported the EO for Ports project here specifically. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and welcome to all three of you. So I would like to get started with basically setting the scene a bit. Maybe, Heine, you can tell us a bit more about how ports work, what are the different actors involved, and maybe explain also a bit more about how ISL works in this context.
Okay, thank you very much. So I would like to start with ISL. So the Institute of Shipping, Economics and Logistics is a research institute. So we are mainly doing research. We have about 45 employees. And we're doing research, consulting, and also know-how transfer in maritime logistics. And from our perspective, maritime logistics means not only the transport leg of the vessel, of the ship, it also includes the hinterland transport. So when you think about a container transport, for instance, you also have the transport to and from the port, which means a transport via barge, train, and truck. And in addition to that, we not only deal with container transport, we also deal with break bulk and also shipping itself. So also deal with the ships itself. But I have to say, I'm mainly dealing with container transport itself. We have several competence areas where we are focusing in. One is maritime markets. And maritime markets, we are analyzing and forecasting everything within the maritime economy when it comes to the throughput of ports, what is the current situation of the ports, what might be the future of the ports, when it comes to how many ships are now being built and how many ships are going out of service in the next years and are going to be scrapped. Another area is maritime security, where I am also in, where we are talking about physical security. So these are topics like cargo theft, smuggling, terrestrial acts, but also cybersecurity. And in this domain, we also talk about resilience. That's the reason why everything when it comes to increasing resilience against climate change, this is also a part of this domain. Another area is maritime environment. So every time when it comes to prevent climate change, so to reduce greenhouse gases, when it comes to every kind of regulation which is being put onto the vessels where they have to reduce greenhouse gases, but also on other transport modes like truck, for instance. This is a topic of maritime environment. And another one is maritime transport chain. This is really the global chain, really door to door. So really starting from one warehouse in let's say in China and the whole transport chain down to a certain point in Europe. And here we have research projects mainly focusing on optimization of the transport chain. This could be something like a simulation. This could be a software solution. This could be also just another process which we just want to change a little bit to modify in order to optimize this. Then we have another 3 competence areas, but I would like to keep it a little bit shorter here. These are mainly focusing on everything which is coming down to digital. So this is on the one hand side, it is simulation. It could be also digital innovations like the usage of artificial intelligence in maritime logistics, but it could be also software solutions. So we have a small software department where we are building software in terms of planning or executing transports. So when it comes to, I have a truck, which is the right order to fulfill my orders. So this is the overall scope of ISL. We are working closely with ports, of course, but also with truck operators, train operators, barge operators. We have, as I said, research project, but we also have a lot of consultant projects. And especially in the maritime market section, this is a lot of consultancy which is going on there. And yeah, this is so far from my side on ISL.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Heiner. I apologize because the sun is coming in and out. I look like a ghost or an angel, you can decide, but I'm sorry about the lighting. But yeah, thanks, Heiner. I think it's interesting to start with ISL because I think it really reflects, on one hand, the complexity of the port ecosystem and logistical transport chains, but you've also kind of already started to mention some of the challenges the ports face through the competences of ISL. So maybe for everybody to understand and be on the same page, can you tell us a bit more about the environmental challenges or logistical challenges, main challenges the port actors and stakeholders upstream and downstream faced?
Yes. So what you have to take into account that first of all, ports is really, what is a port anyway? So because it is a really complex system. So you have a lot of actors just inside the port. And when it comes to the whole transport chain, you have additional more actors in that. And that makes it really, really complex. So when you take a look just as at the port itself, you have, for instance, the Port Authority. They are responsible for everything about safety and security. So this means they are responsible for fighting against smuggling on the one hand side, but also they have to deal with dangerous cargo, how to store dangerous cargo container, for instance. You have the port management companies. This depends a little bit depending on the setting of the port. Sometimes the management of the port will be also done by the Port Authority. In Bremen, for instance, this is totally different. We have the Port Authority and we have a port management company. And these, let's say it role. So the role of the manager is to managing the infrastructure of the port. And the infrastructure of the port are the berthing places, the harbor itself, but not the building. So it could really happen, depending on the port's setting, that sometimes the port is owning a building and is renting the building, but sometimes, like in Bremen, for instance, it is this way that they are not owning any buildings or something like that. but they're responsible for the infrastructure like dikes, the locks, the flood protection gates. And when it comes to buildings and cranes and such stuff, this is something where the terminals are jumping in. So we have different terminals, and they are owning buildings, cranes, van carriers, and other handling equipment. And you can also have different kind of terminals, of course, like in Bremen and Bremerhaven, we have a container terminal. We have the second largest container terminal in Bremen of Germany. It's the second largest container terminal. We have the second largest auto terminal of Europe in Bremerhaven. And we also have a little bit break and bulk transport stuff. And this is just more or less the physical and the regulative body, you could say so. What we also have is, of course, a port community system, because every actor has several systems, and sometimes these systems have to talk to each other. And this is something where the port community system is jumping into. So when it comes to information about where is my container going, from which terminal would it be translocated to which other terminal, and other information will be handled mostly of the port community system. And this is something like a spider in the web. So when you think about everything digital. And the port community system is also talking to customs. And of course, customs is also a real body. So it's also someone who is really taking care of the security. So customs is also part of the port ecosystem. Then you have the port railway, and we also have other companies, so service companies, which are mooring companies, for example, which are taking control of the vessels when they are being berthed. And on top of that, and then I would close with this one, is several other companies which are just on the port premises. This might be ship suppliers, so which are supplying the ship with additional stuff. And we could also have packing centers, for instance. And you see that the number of actors is already just on the port premises is pretty high. And this means that it's really complex. Everyone has more or less their own systems, and everyone has their own idea of what they have to do or should do. And this makes it quite hard on that side. Yes, I could continue with environmental challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And so operation and environmental challenges would be something like, as I said, many actors, many systems which are interacting. And so one big problem on the operational side is, well, for instance, is the ETA of the vessel, because yes, we have a transponder on the vessel, which is an AIS transponder. This gives me a certain location, but the berthing time is sometimes even then hard to predict, because sometimes I'm not getting the AIS data right on spot. I'm also not getting the AIS data right beforehand, because I'm getting this information just when the vessel is near the shore. So when it's about 25 to 30 kilometers, a little bit more far away from the shore, it's hard for me to predict when the vessel will arrive. And then it's quite hard for me to make my planning on when is the berthing time of the vessel. And you have to think about, we have really, really big vessels, which are discharging about 5,000 containers and charging 5,000 containers. And so this takes about 48 hours to go. And so it's really, really important to have the data in order to plan this. And as you said, the current situation, so geopolitical disruption, make it more harder to predict that, and the consequences are also harder for the ports. Then we have labor shortages, like most branches, also ports are affected onto that. And another topic, which is a little bit depending on the market and the current situation, is the capacity of the yard, because sometimes it can really happen that when the vessels are not arriving on time, that you don't have enough space to store the containers. And then you have to store sometimes the containers where usually the van carriers are moving, and that will also decrease the performance of the port itself. So these are some operational challenges what we have in ports. On the environmental side, really one big thing is, of course, extreme weather situations. So when we have strong winds, this could lead to navigation problems and accidents. So this depends where is your vessel and also which kind of vessel do we have. So when you think about barges which are going to the ports, they can also have problems, navigation problems due to droughts, for instance, or to flooding. And another thing is when you have a wind which is 8 Beaufort or higher, so a strong wind, you probably have to shut down operation in the port. So this is another thing which is problematic for the performance of the port itself. Not only wind is a problem, also heat could be a problem. So when we have a really hot period, it could also happen that the asphalt, so the port's premises asphalt, maybe blew up. So this is another problem which could occur. And another topic is, of course, flooding. And there could be also happen that you have a lot of damages due to flooding, which is also occurring due to strong rain or, yes, really due to a flood, of course. One of the biggest or most important ones is, of course, but it's really on the long term, is sea level rise, of course. And this is something where also ports are responsible for, mainly the port management company or the port authority. And of course, coastal protection is not really a new topic. And here in Germany, for instance, it's this way that we already take the planning into account, which we usually have to do for the next, let's say, 30, 40 years. So when you are increasing the dike, you don't want to do it every 5 years. You cannot do that. So you really think about what might be a certain level which I have to achieve and have to take this into account in my planning. But to be honest, it could get tight in roughly 50 years. So we already did a good job on that, but depending on the, let's say, on the forecast, which will really happen, also on the situation which will really happen, it could get a little bit tight. Another topic is everything it's about biodiversity, also water quality monitoring. I'm not really good in that topic, but as far as I know, so you're dealing here with wastewater, so you're monitoring the water quality, and also about biodiversity, so the increase in the acidity, phytoplankton, biodiversity losses. These are also some topics where ports are also getting involved or are involved. Yes. And another thing is, of course, not only about the climate change is already happening. So what do we do without it? We also want to prevent that the situation is getting more worse. So the ports also have to support vessels in getting greener. So for instance, the ports are being asked in order to have onshore power supply. And you can easily think about when you have a really big vessel, which is about 400 meters long, and it's now coming down, they have the sockets that they want to plug it in. It's not that easy because you really have to have a lot of power in order to supply them. So this is another thing. So these are some or a lot of challenges in the operation and environmental aspects of ports.
Thanks so much, Heiner. I mean, I think that the audience here are from the EO community will already kind of recognize a lot of topics that we can support with. I think it also showcased how complex the ecosystem is. I mean, we had the prep call, I'd already understood a bit, but even from today, you mentioned so many more actors. So I think that also brings a lot of different challenges. Maybe I'd like to ask Christos now. So we have the ESA best practices EO for ports, which, as I mentioned, aim to identify, for example, the needs and challenges, as well as the existing EO solutions. Aside from all the topics that Heiner mentioned already, did you come across any other challenges or needs that you identify in the project? Anything else to add on that point?
Yes. First of all, I would like to name one general challenge, and it is the main objective of the overall EO best practice activities that ESA procured 2 years ago, and this is to lower the gap, to minimize the gap of the last mile problem. You see, even for the port authorities, even today, from the community, there is a vast amount of satellite imagery every day. There is a huge amount of data centers and processing of EO data and under remote sensing techniques. We have analytics, we have everything, but there is still some gap between these results and these analytics to actual decision making from these analytics for port operations. To this end, the approach of the activity was twofold. First of all, was to identify the products and services that can be adopted by port authorities even today. So based on the geoinformation needs to provide some such ready, mature products and services. And secondly, to easily provide this off-the-shelf, let's say, products via a technologically homogeneous and easy to access platform that ESA provides, the Geospatial Explorer via Apex. I know Patrick will say more things about that later. To this end, I strongly believe that still there are some challenges that have to do with trust. Port economy and port industry is really, really huge. So these kind of industries don't want to avoid any kind of business risk at any levels. So the integration of Earth observation and remote sensing techniques with their ongoing legacy systems and everyday business is really, really important in order to facilitate and somehow utilize in a smaller base, at least in the beginning, some such Earth observation solutions.
Thanks, Christos. I think later on you'll tell us a bit more about the specific solutions that you kind of developed in the framework of the EO Ports project, but maybe you can just give us, based on also what Heiner said and the work you've done, an overview of where EO can really support those challenges or help address the needs of ports.
Yes, Rainer indeed covered a lot of aspects. I would briefly explain the overall work logic of how we work during this activity. We try to make any analysis and any study that had to do with the user needs completely unbiased for Earth observation. So we held several workshops with stakeholders, port stakeholders, and end users. And we try to avoid, first of all, the words of Earth observation, remote sensing at first. What we wanted to see is which exactly are the geoinformation requirements, even if those are not directly or indirectly connected with Earth observations. And indeed, there are some needs like 3D digital twins, like Internet of Things, and some such aspects that cannot directly be solved or addressed from Earth observation solely. However, what we did identify is 16 really, really well described user needs, out of which 12 could be directly or indirectly be addressed by Earth observations. These kind of needs were categorized in environmental sustainability for port environments, into port planning, monitoring, and performance, logistic performance, the economic sustainability of ports, some safety and security aspects and regulations. And there were some really niche and specific needs and solutions that had to do with regional specific aspects like seasonal ice, like sea level rise or sea level drop. Also, Rainer mentioned some use cases like that, and I know that Bremerhaven region is following such solutions, and one of the 4 actually applications we distributed is one of these. So we managed to have a map both of the the categories I just mentioned, but also to provide some solutions that even today can solve this kind of needs and requirements.
Thanks, Christos. I think we'll kind of get back to that in a second, but kind of I'd like to hear from you. Maybe I'd be curious to understand if EO, in your experience and your exchanges with port actors, if it's used, if so, how much is it? Are there case examples where it could be used but it's not being used, and therefore what are kind of the key barriers and challenges to integrating EO? I think, as Christos said, it's not always about raw data or the data sets, satellite information, these kind of things. Maybe more about decision support. But yeah, what in your experience, what have been the key areas where it is used, not used, so on?
Yes. So as far as I know, it's mainly by nowadays is mainly used so on water depth, for example. So every time it also depends on yes, it's really keep it simple. Like how much does it cost to use it? So if it's something that it's free for use, then it's more likely that it's being used so far. And this is also one of the key problems that sometimes it's just too costly to use it nowadays. But sometimes it's even also just a problem that the users are not really aware of which kind of EO services are available. And so this is one big problem, that when we are talking to some of the ports, then it's not really that they really know what's already possible. And sometimes they know, yes, this might be possible, but when you're going into the nitty-gritty details, like the temporal resolution, also spatial resolution, they have sometimes a different idea of that. And another big problem, which already Christos indicated, is of course that it's really good to have the data on the one hand side, but you have to integrate this into legacy systems. And sometimes it's not even that it's just one system which you have to deal with. And this is really sometimes really a pain in the neck. And yes, you might sometimes say, okay, we build another platform for that. But when you think about a complex system like ports, then it's another platform. So, and it's getting more and more platforms after a while. It's just another system. So what would be interesting for them, for ports, it's mainly of the ocean level and surface. So in order to monitor this, in order to get a better understanding of the sea level rise, and also to get more information about climate change risk, what I already indicated. So if you could get more information on heat and storms and heavy rains. And another thing which especially Brain pointed out, that they are really interested in order to get historical data of flooding, so that they can really see when I have a flood, what kind of areas are affected to what extent, in order to see probably some, let's say, how to say, something which is just reproducing, so happening every time, in order to find a solution for that problem. And another thing is, of course, about biodiversity. It's about monitoring water quality and biodiversity.
Thanks a lot. Actually, I think my colleague put a comment here in the chat, but we in the framework of the work that we're doing on different projects, and also we see there's a quite a big momentum at the EU level on different policies and legislations that are trying to address ports, but also oceans in general. There was this EU port strategy. I think it was published earlier this year. And there was a phase where they were collecting feedback, and we actually took part in the framework of the Oceanis project, but we kind of put out a statement on how Earth observation solutions can support the implementation of these regulations, but port actors in general. And I think my colleague put the link in the chat if you want to read that. But another of the topics that was highlighted there was also the security aspect. So also environmental pollution, so oil spills and so on, but also supporting port actors, tracking illegal activity and these kind of things. I don't know if you've come across this Heiner and or Christos in the works on the EO for ports, or Heiner in your interactions with ports, but we know from our side that our members do have these type of services that can support also on that area.
Yeah, security is of course a really important topic, especially also here in Bremen, because the smuggling, for instance, happened back some years ago, especially in Rotterdam and Antwerp. And then they introduced several measures in order to move the smugglers out, and it happened. Now the smugglers are now going to Bremerhaven and to Hamburg. So yeah, coming back to your question, so security is really something where there is a need to improve, and this might be something where EO services can support. And of course, something like oil spills is also something which is really interesting for ports. As I said, I frame this as wastewater, so it's not only wastewater; it's also oil spills, of course. Yes,
yep.
It's also interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Christos, maybe you could now tell us a bit more about the solutions under EO for ports that were actually developed in the ESA Apex, and then we'll get to Patrick in a second.
Yes. Before that, just to recap that we unbiased, as I said before, we created this list of geoinformation requirements. We also created a list with the ready mature EO products that are commercially or non-commercially available in the market, and then we created the gap analysis to see which of these needs and everyday needs of port operators can be addressed even today with Earth observation. To this end, as a result, I can say that more than 12 applications and products are the main output of this study, because the one aspect of the activity, as I said at the beginning, was this kind of study. The second aspect is, of course, the technological one, and to this end, we developed together with our subcontractors 4 distinct services that address these kind of challenges. The first one was targeted the problem of nighttime pollution, light pollution for fragile environments that are close to big ports, so maybe Natura protected areas or areas with big ecological significance. So we provide everyday information about this light pollution over these areas. Again, Geosystems Hellas created services based on Copernicus Atmosphere Service and Sentinel-5 products for the air quality near the port areas. Our subcontractor Creotech created a land use land cover, an agile land use land cover mapping approach that also provides some insights about changes over ports, change detection. And last but not least, our subcontractor OHP Digital created this tideline extraction approach that vectorize the results of the tideline, where seasonality provides big differences for the sea level at any cases. And also a big shout out also to our other subcontractor, that the Earth Daily Analytics, that also helped a lot during the gap analysis procedure. I will be also providing this link of the Geospatial Explorer via Apex, that these 4 services are online and visible with the help of our colleagues in ESA.
Thanks a lot, Christos. I see we have a couple of questions in the chat. Maybe if other people have questions, you can put them in. But I'd like to turn now to Patrick. So we've mentioned the ESA Apex a couple of times here. We're actually going to have a dedicated EOcafe to ESA Apex. It's the next one on the 21st of May. But Patrick, can you maybe give us a short introduction to what ESA Apex is and how it was used in this case?
Yes. Tanya, thanks for giving us the invitation and the possibility to present Apex here shortly, and how we supported the EO for Ports project. So first of all, I would like to highlight that APEX, the application propagation environments, that's what the acronym stands for, is a transversal project that we have in the Earth Observation Directorate in the Science Department. So it's really supporting all of the projects that we're carrying out to make the results more useful for the larger community. It's implemented by a core consortium consisting of a number of European companies. But what we're really trying to do is to build an open federation of Earth observation-related services and capabilities in Europe that are powered through cloud-based computational services. So first thing to highlight is APEX is not a processing platform. It's rather an initiative to streamline existing resources for processing, analytics, and data provisioning. And what we're trying to do is really to build this open federation following fair data principles. And I think most of your attendees here will be well familiar with fair data principles. So it's about making data and services findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Because we have a similar challenge that Rainer and Christos have already pointed to. Also in Earth observation, we have too many platforms, too many issues with interoperability. And that's really what we're trying to address here, to make the things work in a streamlined manner. And we're focusing on these fair data principles as a guiding principle. The other thing I would like to highlight is that this is the APEX contract. It's a 5-year contract, but we're really trying to establish this as a way of working in the science department. So this should be leading to a persistent new approach of working with Earth observation solution data and algorithms. So the motivation here comes from the sustainability crisis that we have in Earth observation in the end, that a lot of research and development is done, but especially in the science department in Earth observation in ESA, but the outcomes of these results are rarely preserved for the community, and they are rarely preserved in a way that they can be reused by the community. So this is really what we're trying to address in APEX, to transition value-added products, so static products, but also algorithms, into a reusable form so that they can be reused and built upon by other application projects and so forth. So the specific services that we're developing with APEX, they fall into 2 broad categories. There's the so-called algorithm propagation services. So there we deal with supporting project teams in making their application algorithms available as cloud-based on-demand services. There we're following specific interoperability best practices. So we're using, for example, recommending to use OpenEO user-defined processes for these algorithm implementation, or the Earth observation application package specification, which is an OGC best practice. So we're supporting these project teams in porting, in refactoring, in Dockerizing, and deploying these algorithms. We're supporting them with bringing these algorithms into the cloud so they don't have to be platform providers. They can be scientific or application-related algorithm developers. We're providing a number of tools, guides, and expert support for making these algorithms reusable. And we're also supporting these teams in preparing commercial offerings for these value-adding algorithms in the ESA network of resources, which many of your attendees, I think, will be familiar with. There's 2 key resources, and I'll also share the links in the chat in a minute, that I wanted to highlight. So one is the APEX algorithm catalog. So this is a collection of around 45 algorithms that are deployed on different cloud platforms in Europe. They are all executable, so you can run them on demand. They're running on different federated platforms, and they are all permanently checked and benchmarked to ensure that they're actually working and producing results as they should. We're following a number of interoperability best practices here. We'll go more into detail on that at the next edition of EOcafe. And the other resource I wanted to highlight is the APEX product catalog. So this is an open public repository for value-added products. These products follow cloud native specifications and stack metadata. It's fully publicly available. And the key new thing here is that all of the value-added products that we're generating in our projects are now being made available through this repository. Finally, we're also providing project teams with pre-configured project development environments where you have different components that you can choose of. You have a project portal, interactive development environment, a user forum, a data catalog, or the geospatial explorer that Christos already mentioned. And we deploy them for these product teams so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel, but can rather use something off the shelf that we have ready to be reused. And these environments are pre-configured to use the data sets and algorithms that we're making available already. So how do we now support the EO for Ports project? So there was basically 3 steps that we're working on. So the first thing was to make the value-added products that Christos and colleagues have generated available in a persistent way on the long term to the community. And I'll share the link. You will be able to stream these data sets into visualization environments, into QGIS and so forth. So that's the first step, fairly straightforward. The second step then was to support them with the Geospatial Explorer instance that's very modular, configurable, and Christos and his colleagues, they did an excellent job at developing a very nice interactive visualization showcase using this tool and the products that they have generated. And the third and final step is now to look at these applications that the team has developed and transform them into cloud-based on-demand services. And we're going to start with the Tideline algorithm that Christos has already mentioned. And again, we'll have a dedicated discussion on this in a month from now, where we'll go more into detail. Thanks, Tanya.
Thanks a lot, Patrick. I think we already have a question from Emmanuel on that, but Emmanuel, I invite you to join us on the 21st. If you can't, let me know and I'll make sure that we answer that question. Actually, if people attending here will attend the next one, you can also send us some questions you might have ahead of time so we can make sure that also the ESA colleagues can address those. But yeah, I'd like to come back actually to a couple of questions we got on today's port topic. I think there was a question earlier from Jürgen. I mean, it's quite a simple question, but maybe you want to come in and ask, and anything else that you may want to ask.
I've only a question because I've performed together with...
We can't hear you very well, Jürgen.
Okay, once again, I'm putting it down, sorry. I've just run a project together with ISL and ESA. It was a Summa for Rail project, and in this project we involved also the port activities. And in that time, actually, we had chosen the Duisport, which was an inner port. And in that area, there weren't such a lot of interesting things. I know, for example, from Bremerhaven port, that had a lot of problems also with stability, and we used, for example, EGMS services to check out stability monitoring, infrastructure monitoring. I just wanted to know if in this direction something we're going more ahead, because we got the impression at the ports that there are a lot of people doing logistics and observance about traffic, but a lot of ports doesn't have the right people to integrate these kind of information. Were there any changes in the recent times about that? The question, I think it's more to Rainer, or if you know something about that.
So yes, so I'm mainly dealing with logistics. So I'm not really in. I cannot really imagine what do you really mean in detail. So when it comes to structural things about of ports, it's really absolute off topic for me. Okay. I'm not into that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because we were considering flooding risk for ports and stability, especially in areas where you have salt domes, and we have a lot of subsidence in some areas of about 550 millimeters per year, which is quite critical. And these were some outcomings which were regarded, and but I don't know about any actions after, or perhaps Patrick might know it because they're doing a lot of projects in this direction. Thanks.
Thanks, Patrick. I see you're nodding, but I don't know if that was just out of interest or because you have an answer for that.
Well, I mean, at least for the subsidence, there is some pretty mature services that look at subsidence and ground motion. For example, the European Ground Motion Service is a pretty mature service offered through Copernicus, where we have a couple of projects that are actually adding a value-adding layer on top of that. So there's quite a bit that we can do for that. Also for sea level rise, I mean, we did some work on modeling projections of sea level rise together with terrain to really show where the sea level will rise by how much. So this is something that we've done in the past for sure.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Jürgen. I see Emmanuel Monton also had a question that was about the ports, I think, today. Emmanuel, do you want to come in and...
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, my question was related to data sharing. I'm deeply involved in various data sharing initiatives, being AX or Common European Data Spaces, and I came across a number of initiatives in that domain, data sharing, linked with port and maritime. So I gave example in the Netherlands and in Finland, and my question was, are you, ISL, involved in such data sharing initiatives? I put some link in the chat. FinTraffic, for instance, in Finland, has focused on a maritime data space, which is focusing on ports in order to reduce the time the stakeholders are spending at nearby the port, I would say.
Yes. So I was involved in different projects where we dealt with data sharing itself. Which is quite obvious, and also sometimes, like you mentioned here, the example of the Port of Rotterdam, where it's mainly about secure data sharing. We also carried out a project where we talked about really a secure way to share the data between the port community system and all the actors which are dealing with the port community system itself, because it's as I said, a spider in the web. So it's really important to make it so secure. And we also came up with some ideas on that. But I also understand your question a little bit, like data sharing initiatives, like a data sharing standard, and there are a lot of different data sharing standards. And to speak frankly, sometimes it's really that way that you have about, let's say, 50 different kind of data sharing standards, and the next project is creating another standard, another standard, another standard. So at the end, everyone is building a new standard. And then also saw back about 15 years ago, someone who tries to build up the meta standard, and it's really, really hard to build up a standard, because even then you have to connect your legacy systems according to the data sharing standard. And this is also something which make it, at the end of the day, easier for the ones which are joining in later. But all the systems which are now have to adapt into the data sharing standard have to be changed and have to talk to this data sharing itself. But I also have to admit that I don't know these maritime data space NDS by heart, but this is also something because by now at the current state, I'm not dealing with data sharing project by now. The last one is about 6 or 7 years ago. So yes, we're dealing with it with data sharing initiatives, but it really depends which kind of data sharing initiatives is now actual the latest thing where everyone is talking about.
Thanks, Rainer. And within the geospatial Earth observation space domain, we have 20 years. We are 20 years ahead, thanks to the Open Geospatial Consortium, which has set up this set of open specification in order to share data in the right way.
That's good.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I don't see other questions for now, but I wanted to kind of ask one last question, I guess mainly to Heiner and Christoph, but Patrick, of course, feel free to jump in with your opinion. So we've heard today about the challenges, we've heard about the solutions, we've heard maybe about barriers to integrating EO solutions. Heiner, in your experience, and also maybe Christoph through the project or other activities you're involved in, can you maybe share your thoughts on how we can increase the interaction between the two communities, or what can we do, not just as Earth, but in general as both communities, so that the Earth observation solutions are actually reaching the ports and that we better understand the needs. I mean, EO for ports is one example of how we can do that, but yeah, do you have any thoughts on that? Maybe starting with Heiner.
So I'm also part of the Oceanics project, and in Oceanics we also have a similar approach that we have different ports which are inside the project, and inside the project we carried out a requirement analysis in order to find out which kind of services are being interesting for the ports itself, and then to build a platform in order to provide the information to ports. And this is it is a good way, probably not the best way to do so, but it's a good way to interact with the ports, because then you could build up some services and to show the users what is possible. And this may also be the way that other ports will see this as a best practice and see this, say, this might be really interesting for me. And then to not only to see the data on the platform itself, but also to change, to modify the legacy systems and to provide the data into their systems. So that could be one way. But it's not every time only just a question about just research projects. Sometimes you really have to do something, but this is also, as I said, a little bit problematic on the cost side. But coming back to that, it's having such research project just to show what is possible and to promote this, because sometimes, as I said, users are not really aware of what kind of services are already available, what is possible in terms of temporal and spatial resolution, and what kind of costs do I have to bear in mind. So this is a good way.
Christos, anything to add, or Patrick?
Yes, it's a big discussion, and there are no easy answers to that future roadmap. However, I strongly believe again that we, as also Patrick mentioned before, we do not need to reinvent the wheel. We do not need any more GIS dashboards or interfaces. And of course, we cannot say that Earth observation will solve every problem that any sector and also the port industry has. To this end, we need some initiatives, we need some maybe fundings, some calls that will be dedicated to integrate some mature Earth observation solutions into legacy applications and legacy systems that port authorities operate today. I strongly believe that in big markets like the port industry, that, as I said in the beginning, these kind of markets do not want to take any kind of risk in their everyday operation because this risk accounts for a lot of money. Trust is slow to build, and maybe one false alarm from an EO output can set the adoption of such services, can set it back significantly. So, as an example, we discussed previously about some legacy, let's say, VTS systems that port authorities operate, vessel tracking systems. I don't see in the near future, that vessel detection from space will take place of this port, let's say, VTS, close to port VTS systems. Because even in 99% accuracy, one false alarm can set the overall port authority into a pause of activities, and this costs a lot of money. However, this even in 80% accuracy of a vessel detection algorithm, which can be easily achieved in high resolution, medium resolution, or even very high resolution optical data today, can be really significant in case of security aspects, as Rainer said before, and in case of for a malicious reason, someone closed the VTS system or the ICE antenna. So we see the two different sides of the same coin, that Earth observation can significantly enhance some port operators, but cannot say that we solve any problem to this end. Small steps at a time, but some crucial steps that can be integrated to everyday business.
Thanks a lot, Chris. I don't know if, Patrick, you had anything to add to this?
Maybe just quickly, I mean, I think Rainer already mentioned the lack of awareness. I think that's something we're tackling. We're trying to, like with the Geospatial Explorer dashboard for the EO for ports, we're trying to show what is out there, what's possible. The other thing that's really important, I think, is, and that's really something we're focusing on, a co-creation approach with stakeholders. So taking the specific needs that organizations like ASL have into consideration for the capabilities we're developing. I think that's a strong approach that we're taking, at least in the EOP science department now. And yeah, I mean, the integration into legacy systems, Christos has mentioned this last kilometer challenge. That is indeed something that we're tackling right now with a number of initiatives. So.
Thanks a lot, Patrick. And thanks so much, Christo and Rainer, all three of you today for the conversation. I have a few announcements before we close the EOcafe, but I also want to say that as Earth, as I mentioned earlier in the EOcafe, we're really trying to advocate for the capability of Earth observation, but also be a facilitator of connecting these communities. That, as I mentioned, there's a lot of movement at EU level on different policy files, on not just ports, but oceans and a lot of different things. And yeah, if you're interested in that, you can, as I mentioned, there was this position paper that we did on some of the capabilities of Earth observation for supporting the EU port strategy. But it's really an up and coming topic. We actually have a session at our annual event Expandio, which will be taking place on 10 and 11 June. I think Francesco is sharing the slides now, but this is more focused on oceans. So it won't be necessarily specifically about ports, but I think it's similar topics that are going to be explored. So if you're interested in joining us for that or the rest of the event as it stands, you have the information here. And I think it will be put in a second in the chat as well. And then just another 2 announcements and then I'll be done. Because it could be interesting to the community. On the 20th of May, from 10 to 12 CEST, we will be hosting the first SEBS 360 exchange workshop. The SEBS 360 is basically a continuation of the Sentinel benefit studies, so SEBS. And at this workshop, we'll be hearing basically from past cases and new cases on the benefits of impact assessment. So if you're interested in that, the information is there. And then the final call I would have for today is basically the industry survey. I think we've mentioned it in previous EOcafes, but it's really important for us. It's a great tool for us to be able to, when we talk to stakeholders and different users, to show the impact of Earth observation. So if there's any companies here, Earth members or none, please fill it in. It's still open. So with all of that being said, thank you so much to all 3 of you for today's conversation. As I mentioned, the next EOcafe is on the 21st of May. We'll be welcoming Patrick and some other ESA colleagues to really dive deeper into the ESA aspects. So as I said, if you have already questions or things that you're wondering about, you can already send them to me and I can pass them on to Patrick. But otherwise, yeah, just join the EOcafe and you'll have the opportunity to ask those then. So thanks again to everyone. At this point, we'll cut the recording and yeah, feel free to stay on if you want to chat or off the record, or I'll guess we'll see you on the 21st of May. And thank you, Christos, Rainer, and Patrick, and everyone for joining.